Hey, this is Roaming Millennial. Welcome back to my channel. Today, let's talk about oppression. And special announcement, just so you guys know, I am now selling merchandise.
Of course they're selling merchandise. Gotta capitalize on right-wingers' desires to make ridiculous ideas a trend. Bearing you stolen artwork, Paul Soy Boy Joseph Watson sells Brain Force, contains soy, and in another video, you're selling magic tea.
So in my last video, I covered the student protests at Evergreen College, and like a lot of you guys, I think, watching the footage of the students protesting and hearing how strong their victimhood mentalities were really irked me, to say the least.
Kind of funny how people standing up for their rights is often derided as being a victim by the right, while suffering in silence is strength. Also funny how conservatives are winding up being silenced on YouTube and Twitter by being demonetized or losing their blue checkmark.
And as frustrating as it might be hearing students complain about being oppressed at a liberal arts college in the United States, the sad fact of the matter is that these kids are probably just parroting what they've been told their entire lives. The idea that non-white people, or people of color, if you will, are being systematically marginalized by our society is a narrative that's been pushed by social justice advocates for decades.
Maybe because it's true? Ever think about that? Yes. Things have gotten better, but when you're assembling a 500-piece puzzle, do you stop after assembling 300 pieces and decide it's good enough? Nope. Imagine if a football team had the ball, trying to score the game-winning field goal in overtime, then suddenly just squatted on the ball deciding a tie game's good enough for me, which is probably what you want those football players to do, since you and many other masturbators spent months giving Colin Kaepernick hell for kneeling during the national anthem.
It's an idea that's been propagated by leftist academics, quote-unquote journalists, and especially increasingly in popular culture. As repugnant as I find the behavior of the Evergreen College students, it's really not all that surprising that they think the way they do, having grown up in this kind of environment. So in this video, in the hopes of healing this headache of imaginary oppression that is going around the social justice sphere,
poisoning the well already, calling it imaginary oppression. Because as we know, if it doesn't exactly resemble the horrifying images from our history books, it's not real racism, right?
We're going to be talking all about oppression, what it means to be oppressed, and how in the United States and in the rest of the Western world, no, people of color, you are not oppressed. So to start, let's go over the definition of oppression. And yes, I know this is super basic, but after hearing those students protest, I really do feel that cracking a dictionary open is necessary.
Yet when a feminist uses the dictionary definition, your side gives her hell for it.
So the definition of oppression is really quite simply prolonged cruel or unjust treatment or control. Now with this definition, I think it is perfectly clear to say that in the past, people of color, and more specifically African American people, were oppressed by societies in the United States and the West in general. I'm not going to argue against that.
Here comes the big but.
However, the issue here is that these Evergreen students and so many social justice warriors out there are not just arguing for the idea of past oppression, but for current and ongoing oppression.
Yes.
And really, that is just a completely inaccurate analysis of the world that we live in. Obviously, in the United States, there are no legal rights that a white person possesses that a non-white person does not, and there are no laws on the books that reference an individual's race in any way.
As we all know, laws make racism magically go away, right? Do you know what Jim Crow was called back in the day? Separate but equal. The claim that segregation guaranteed equal access and equal facilities for African Americans. The reality was nothing like that, however. Are things better than they were in the Jim Crow days? Absolutely. Is racism over? Absolutely not.
Right? I mean, our legal system, our entire system of government is not one that is racially coded. And while, in my opinion, equal standing in the eyes of the law and equal standing before government is a pretty clear indication that oppression is not happening, some critics might say, no, what are you talking about? There's no equal standing. There are huge racial disparities when it comes to the legal system, especially the criminal justice system. Just look at how much more likely black people are to be incarcerated than Hispanic or white people. I mean, obviously that's the result of oppression.
And we're about to hear the standard Republican talking points why it's not, aren't we?
So for oppression to be happening, black people would need to be incarcerated unjustly at a higher rate than other races, right? Because it wouldn't be oppression if these people were being justly arrested and prosecuted for crimes that they actually did commit.
Yep, that's why a mom who happened to be African American was arrested for leaving her daughter unattended in the food court while she was 20 feet away at a job interview, and why so many black people are given ridiculous sentences for smoking and selling weed, right? That's also why George George Zimmerman got off scot-free after killing Trayvon Martin, right? Because according to Anti-SJWs, he was this vicious thug and Zimmerman was just doing his job, when even knowing the very basics about the case will tell you that's horseshit. And that's why Brock Turner only got a 6-month sentence that was further reduced to 3 for violently raping a woman and was said to be a kid with a bright future. Or how about the black kid shot to death for using a fucking squirt gun? Even more centrist types admit that was blatant racism. And the recent school shooting where they arrested the killer alive, who happened to be white. So why the sympathy for the white kid by a lot of people and the lack of sympathy for the black kid? I'm barely cracking the surface.
So while many social justice activists try to paint the large black prison populations in the US as evidence of oppression, the fact is that black people are more likely to commit crimes than other races. So with this being the case, it is not unjust and therefore not oppressive for the racial makeup of prison populations to be representative of the racial makeup of people who commit crimes.
It's a mix of poor people in urban areas commit more crimes, black people in urban areas are more likely to be poor for various reasons, and societal prejudice and harsher sentences keep them in poverty, while conservatives proclaiming racism is over, pull yourself out of poverty, well, they're more likely to be arrested and given harsher sentences.
The question here isn't, are there proportionately more black people in prison than white people? Because obviously that's the case. The question is why? Is it because prejudice causes more black people than white people to be convicted of crimes that they did not commit? Or is it because on average a black person is more likely to commit a crime than a white person and therefore more likely to go to jail for what they've done? Statistics would indicate the latter.
Did you know that crime statistics are based on those who are arrested? And it's not just simple as black people commit more crimes.
If we take a look at the most dangerous cities in the United States, we see that in general the African American populations of these cities are much higher than the national average.
If we look at cities in general, the African American population is higher than the national average. I know where you're going with this.
And I'm not bringing this up to go all race realist on you guys, but regardless of who's being charged for these crimes, wrongfully or not, areas that have large or concentrated African American populations also tend to correlate very strongly with areas that have high rates of reported violent crimes.
Correlation does not equal causation. No matter how many times you want to say, I'm not a racist, I'm not. It's clear you were saying that black people are more crime prone. But let's take a look at a few select cities. Dothan, Alabama is around 2/3 African American, but has one of the lowest crime rates in Alabama and is very close to the national average. Wheeling, West Virginia is 91% white, but has a high crime rate. Altoona, Pennsylvania is 96% white and one of the most dangerous cities in Pennsylvania. Let's also remember that small towns with high African American populations exist, such as Fort Washington, Maryland, which is one of the safest communities and most well-off in the country and is nearly 3/4 black.
So perhaps our legal system isn't going around willy-nilly convicting innocent black people of crimes they didn't commit. Perhaps individuals who happen to be black are making bad choices for which they have to deal with the consequences.
And perhaps as most things in life, it's a little from column A and a little from column B. Your argument is a bit of a straw man, wouldn't you say? Conservatives want easy answers to tough questions, and when a complex answer is given from the left, they boil it down into a straw man that's easier to argue against.
And of course, another thing that's often brought up when it comes to the alleged oppression of non-white people in the US is the fact that African American and Hispanic incomes are much lower than the average white income. Clearly this equals oppression. I mean, come on.
And here comes the just so explanation without trying to dig below the surface, like these types always do. I know looking at the why is hard, but come on.
But again, like the prison statistics, the wage gap statistics would only be indicative of oppression if they were the result of unjust treatment. Black people and Hispanic people on average earning less than white people would in no way mean there's oppression going on if it was just the result of their comparative lack of skills. And when you look at the average education levels of the different races, it seems like this is actually pretty much the case.
And here comes more bullshit racist explanations that don't look at the why. Because obviously, if POC aren't doing well off and aren't as educated on average, it can't be because of issues with urban schools, a system that doesn't foster a good educational environment, and a repeating cycle of poverty because many can't afford college, are passed over when it comes to scholarships, and bullshit like when applying for a job, getting arrested because your kid, less than 4 meters away, is unattended. Nah, it's gotta be that they don't want to. They're just lazy welfare mooches, right? Isn't that where you're headed with this? Even if you're not a race realist, claiming that POC are in poverty by choice isn't much better.
And something that I'd like to mention, which really debunks the idea that non-white people in the US are oppressed, is the fact that there are non-white groups out there who on average do better than their white counterparts in terms of education and finances. And yes, felony charges too.
Oh look, another anti-SJW cliche, the model minority myth.
So under the SJW narrative, would it be safe to say that black people are the most oppressed, then Hispanic people, then white people, and then maybe Asians aren't oppressed at all? Or maybe they have special Asian privilege?
Here's a little bit of information to throw a monkey wrench into that. In Vancouver, the Chinese immigrant population has a high rate of poverty, a high crime rate, and education issues not seen in other Chinese immigrant populations. Also, much of the West historically has more of a respect for Chinese, Japanese, and Indian culture than traditional African culture. So that impacted their views on Chinese immigrants, and today of Indian immigrants.
Of course, that's not the case. Look, there are real problems in the black community. There's issues with incarceration, there's issues with drug use, unemployment, poverty, lack of education, fatherlessness. All of those problems are absolutely real, but the thing is, when you make the conversation about oppression and marginalization, it's almost like an abdication of personal responsibility.
And here it is. The "it's your fault, you're poor" rationale. Couldn't be that they can't exactly pull themselves up by their bootstraps when they don't have any boots to begin with, right?
You're implying that in order to fix this problem, it's the outside world and the system that needs to change instead of your behavior. And look, the system is by no means perfect, but I think as is displayed by the success of Asian Americans, I don't think it's this racist, awful thing that people make it out to be.
150 years ago, you would have been directing this at Irish immigrants. 150 years ago, at Italian immigrants. They only got out from under the boot of racist America by being accepted as white people. White Hispanics are starting to do better because they're being increasingly accepted as white people. This will never happen with most POC. So society's idea of white as the gold standard has to go away for good. Maybe stop having a prejudice against resumes that have names like Jamal, Tyrone, or LaQuisha, because that's another factor.
The United States is a meritocracy, and when we're adults, at least the situations that we find ourselves in are more often than not the result of our own personal decisions.
The US, a meritocracy?
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
Having the mentality that the system is out to get you and that it won't let you succeed because it's prejudiced against you is not a recipe for success. This oppression narrative doesn't encourage hard work, it doesn't encourage entrepreneurship.
Hard work equals success is a fallacy that many believe that often turns out to be false. Let's use YouTube as a microcosm of this. You and I both know that there are a lot of amazing channels that stay buried in obscurity for the entire duration of their existence. On the other hand, twats like Logan Paul make it big by being obnoxious douche nozzles. Making it on both the internet and in the real world is more about luck, connections, and a set of privileges that some may or may not have. I know many people hate the P word because they think it's to shame them, but a better way to look at it is the Oregon Trail game. Some people play on easy mode, and others on medium, and others still on hard. Sure, may playing in easy mode will fail, and may playing on hard mode succeed, but let's not pretend it's the same thing.
As we've seen at Evergreen, the only thing it encourages is victimhood. If we want non-white communities to flourish, we need to be teaching people how to succeed in life, not teaching them how to complain about life.
Teach them not to complain about life? Your whole channel is doing exactly that. There's throwing stones while living in glass houses, and then there's throwing stones from within your glass house. You're doing the latter.
It is statistically proven that if you finish high school, wait until you're 21 to get married, then have kids, and work full-time, there is only a 2% chance that you will be in poverty, and there is a 75% chance that you will be in the middle class, and this is true across all races. Success is possible, and it's possible for everybody. We just have to be willing to work for it.
Statistically proven. Nice job with the weasel words. There's quite a lot of unemployed college graduates, and they're not all gender studies or liberal arts majors like you're probably thinking. It's a little higher than 2%. As kids were told, success is possible for everyone. You can be whatever you want to be if you just work hard. While the reality is, 90% of us will be mired in mediocrity working dead-end jobs because they pay the bills, want to strive for something bigger, but afraid to because we might fail. And most of the remaining 10% will go for the glory and fail. Not everyone could be middle or upper class. That's reality. So, that concludes this video. I recommend you also take a look at Sean and Jen's debunking of this same video, which I'll include in the link below.